Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Nathan Chan, and I am going to be speaking on behalf of our collaboration between UCLA, LMU, and CAUSE, and I'm pleased to share the release of our report titled Asian American Voter Access in Language Ballot Use, Voter Experiences, and Effectiveness of Voter Outreach. So before we begin our presentation, I'm actually going to start out with a lot of thank yous and a lot of recognition, so please bear with me, and just a description of why we needed so many people involved in this report. So I wanted to recognize the very large group of people who are really dedicated in terms of their time and effort to carrying out this study. To produce the report, there were so many different tasks that we needed to put into place, including individuals helping field the survey, translating the surveys into Asian languages and Spanish, and then identifying fieldwork sites where we would be able to contact the respondents. We also had to design and program a survey that can be answered on a lot of different modes, and then also we had to analyze the data, and then of course writing and designing the final report. So it's always really hard to tell by looking at the PDF how much work goes into creating it, so I wanted to recognize all of the labor that's required to carry out a project like this. So first, I wanted to thank the undergraduate students that we recruited from UCLA and LMU to help design, field, and analyze this survey to voters. So 4 of our students are here. Sophia, Sydney, Jasmine, right, are going to be presenting, some of their experiences with doing all of this. In addition, those that could not join us tonight from UCLA were Eugenie Chang, William Chow, Emma Chen, Harvind Gruel, Anna Guan, Emma He, Jeff Lee, Shannon Tu, Cyrus Vong, and from LMU there was Maddie Chen and Nikita Karthikeyan. And then we also want to thank Soleil, our team of graduate students that were also helping us with translations, Trisha, Giovanni, and Albert. And then we also appreciate the CAUSE staff, Denise, Isolis, Andrea, Kobe, Heather, Farah, who I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot about in terms of their efforts tonight, so we thank them. And then we also had volunteers that helped us with survey data collection. So we recognized Joyce Sway, Trisha Wynn, Edward Burden, Eric Bartolo, Emily Hackley, Abby Herninkis, JD Kim Levine, Robinson Lee, Samantha Lung, Grant Lee, Joshua Mosley, Annie Nguyen, Natalie T, Vera Varanchi, Genevieve Yap, Matthew Yap, Soleil again, Angel Yuan, Marabella Zengrilli, and Eddie Tapia Papo. All right, and then with the design and formatting of the report, we had Lauren Ho and Maya Liu. All right. So finally, we also like to thank those that gave us access to the fieldwork locations, including the California Department of Social Services, World Journal, City of Monterey Park, Alhambra Chamber of Commerce, City of Alhambra, City of Culver City, Korean American Federation Los Angeles, Little Tokyo Service Center, and then the Thai Community Development Center. All right, thank you to all those. Can we give a round of applause to all of our team here? Yes, it was a lot, and it was a really large effort, so thank you to everyone here. So a little bit of a backstory behind how this project was conceived. It was conceived after a conversation following a UCLA-sponsored panel on Asian American civic engagement, where Natalie Maswoka, who's not able to be here today, Nancy, and I all served as panelists. And in this conversation, we talked about academic and community partnership, and what we should be doing together, and how we can best leverage each other's skill set in an effort to achieve a shared goal. And we're all interested in achieving and increasing Asian American voter turnout in Los Angeles, but felt like there was not enough reliable or systematic information about Asian American voters in Los Angeles, as most studies focus on the national electorate. So we felt that many surveys about Asian American voters lacked attention also to the nuances of life in Los Angeles, and primarily focused on high propensity voters or regular voters, which means that we actually don't know very much about those who don't actually vote, right? So in an attempt to do that, and in thinking about this conversation, right, for an academic researcher, we have to start thinking about what kind of data we have, and what we can collect in order to help answer these questions. So we began to envision a project to involve a survey of Asian American voters in Los Angeles, right? And as an academic and community partnership, the survey was not simply about designing an academic study, but how then we can use this data collection and informing the outreach practices for community organizations and other grassroots groups. So we thought about a study where we had an opportunity to really connect with Asian American respondents, because most survey data today is collected anonymously online or by the phone with little personal in-person contact, right? So we decided to kind of fill in some of this gap. So we decided to conduct an in-person study that also provided the opportunity for students to be involved in data collection, and then also provided us with the opportunity to also just talk to voters about their experiences about voting in Los Angeles, especially since we don't know much. We know that Asian Americans are not necessarily the target for political campaigns. Our engagement with this type of in-person study would be an opportunity to also engage with Asian Americans about their interest in elections. So we designed a study where we'd be able to contact respondents in person at community events. And we leveraged the timing of the study, which coincidentally happened in January, where many of the events that we attended were Lunar New Year festivals, right? So which attracted large numbers of Asian Americans in the community. So here are some of the pictures that we have at one of our field sites. And so here, right, we designed a survey that could be collected by answering questions on a smartphone or a tablet at these community events. And since we wanted to engage with as many communities as possible, we offered the survey in English, simplified in traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, Spanish, and Thai. So many of our students and volunteers who recruited respondents were also bilingual, so they were also able to help non-English speaking respondents complete their survey. One important thing that we learned is the challenge of properly translating Asian American political concepts into Asian languages. For example, properly translating the concept of partisanship, right? For example, saying a respondent identifies as a strong Democrat, a strong Republican, right? A weak Democrat or a weak Republican. There's so many ways to translate this concept, right? So essentially we had to really think about careful ways in order to make appropriate choices in thinking about how to translate these concepts using our subject matter expertise. So I'll turn to Soleil, one of our translators of the survey material, who can kind of share a little bit about the challenges that we had and the successes that we had in terms of translating political material.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Chen, for that beautiful introduction to the entire project of this study, and for that specific example about the strength of partisanship. So my birth name is Shen Xiao, and my nickname is Soleil. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an alumni of the Causes Leadership Institute program, and currently I also serve as the activist in residence at UCLA's Asian American Studies Center, where I'm doing a research project. So I want to share a little bit about my experience translating this voter outreach survey into both traditional and simplified Chinese. So just to set the stage on the general concept of translation, which I do imagine many of folks who are multilingual in the audience probably intuitively relate or might be professional translators and have specific expertise and experience, that in general, when a piece of writing is written by an author, each reader technically reads it and interprets it and have an internalized understanding of that text, and then they might be able to repeat it back. But each person doing that process could have a slightly different interpretation. Like, that's how texts work, right? So one of these readers then becomes a translator in a specific process. So that translator is translating that text from the originally written language, in this case English, to the target language through their internal filter. So in many ways, especially in the literary world, folks often talk about translation as an act of opening access and simultaneously as an act of betrayal, because it is because that is an essential part of the act of translation. So this is the larger context of translation and the duality of that I want all of you to have in mind. And within this context, I'm going to specifically talk about translation of political materials to Chinese. So when I was doing the voter translation, among other translation experiences I've had, I often think about the political terms and language, word choices that's related to things like elections, voting, registrar offices, etc. That these words are used differently in different contexts in which Chinese is spoken. And as many of you might know, there are lots of ethnic Chinese diaspora folks who prefer to read their materials in Chinese, who have ties to places including mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, diasporas in Southeast Asia, and other worldwide diaspora Chinese-speaking communities, some of whom have eventually made their way to the United States. So they all come from different political histories, given depending on where they hail from, and different political contexts. So all of that history essentially give us a long list of possibilities when we do translation, and then which also opens up possibilities for how these words will be interpreted by a reader of Chinese. And also, the language that folks use at home, if folks speak primarily Chinese at home, but maybe English in a professional setting, right, that the set of vocab used at home is also different from the outward-facing space. And in terms of the specific language that's typically used for ballots, for voting, are typically not home language, are not used often in home language. So there's also just a lot of barriers in accessing that set of particular political vocab. Additionally, there's fortunately actually a lot of Chinese language media that is available, especially in Southern California, but throughout the country, newspapers, television, radio programs, etc. Right? And because a lot of these programs are also grounded in their specific geographical contexts and grounded in the context of the writers for the shows or for the newspapers, there's also an accumulation of various political vocab over time from these different language sources. So all of these things contribute to the extreme difficulties in producing what we might want to call accurate translation, but also challenges the very concept of accuracy and gives us barriers to understand what is the best way to translate something so that it's accessible to the largest number of people. And then two small examples I'll give that's also very specific to ballet-related translation. One is that governmental levels, such as city level, county level, etc., don't always have equivalencies, again, depending on the political context in which a specific reader's Chinese is grounded in, right? So that can be a challenge in helping folks understand what level of government we're talking about. And then another example related to this is the translation of proper names. I was specifically talking to Nancy about this example that in some material that we have seen before, places like Orange County can sometimes be translated to County of Oranges, which is not typically comprehensible to folks who might otherwise recognize OC or Orange County. And I've also seen places like Monterey Park being translated to Park of Monterey, and Monterey is translated phonetically, where if you drive around in Monterey Park, a lot of the official names of that city is translated in that order. It's the phonetic translation of Monterey plus the word park, and not reverse. So there's just a lot of inconsistencies that we can observe throughout different spaces that adds to the challenges in comprehension. And finally, I want to raise one more thought-provoking point and leave that as a question for folks, I think. And this one is a big question because I think it poses both a linguistic challenge, but also an ethical and moral challenge when we think about the act of translation. As many folks who might know who have had access to voting in the past or have read ballot measures, typically ballot measures are phrased in ways that in English, even as a highly educated and or native speaker of English, one might have a hard time understanding what that ballot measure is referring to and whether you should vote yes or no on it depending on your personal values, right? So it's already difficult to understand in English because it's written in a specific register in English that is more like legalese or government document type of language and not everyday conversational accessible English. So when we do that type of translation to the target language, should we retain the original spirit of inaccessibility that is written in English and find that equivalency in Chinese and therefore also be relatively inaccessible to many readers? Or should we take different choices that a translator has to make in that process and open up more access to open up more access to more folks by translating the ballot measure in a way that can be more accessible, right? I truly believe there's not a straightforward answer, and very qualified translators can have difference of opinion and can debate at the word choice level of what to do. And I think that requires deeper conversations, that requires nuances, that requires community participation, all of which require additional resources. So so all of these thoughts I had doing this translation work and the survey work really affirmed my deep belief that it is incredibly important that we continue to put real resources behind language access. Thank you.
Thanks, Soleil, and we'll definitely return back to the need for language access as we go through the results of the survey. So in the photos rolling behind me are some fun, I would say, photos of our team collecting our surveys at the different sites, and I'll turn to Sydney, who was actually at one of the sites, and if you could share a little bit about your experience collecting some of the surveys, that'd be awesome.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney. I'm one of the students who worked on this project from UCLA, and I'm also a current cause intern right now. This was a really great and unique experience for me, especially as a political science major. We don't really get a lot of opportunities to do in-person fieldwork. A lot of times it's really just research papers, reading other people's findings, and writing about it. So it was really cool to just be able to go into community, have these conversations with people, and take a lot away that sometimes you don't really get to see reflected within data or within just numbers. One of the biggest takeaways I think I had in being able to participate in field research through this project was the importance of community and also trust building. A lot of our sites we got through just connections from Cause, Professor Masuoka, even other students as well. Like, we went to a lot of Lunar New Year festivals, we did farmers markets, we even did a local basketball tournament in Little Tokyo. So a lot of these were just made through people's connections that they had, whether they, like volunteered there, worked there, or really just had like familial connections, friend ties, kinship ties. So that was just really nice to see. But also trust building is not just important for allowing us access to these spaces, but also in just getting people to want to engage with us, want to respond to us. At the beginning, I felt like it was very hard. A lot of us were really shy, but as you get your first couple no's, you just get stronger, really, and you just get braver. So we just kept approaching people, we kept trying. And honestly, once we got our first couple of people started to gather around us. Then from that point, once we started already engaging with people, that's when people started to approach us. They would see a crowd around our booth, or they would see us interacting with individuals, like we're going on the iPad or like helping them on their phone fill out the survey. People would kind of be like, oh, what are they doing? What's going on? Like, let's go talk to them. Let's go kind of see what's up and what they're doing. So really, I saw it as kind of, we had been vetted by other community members who were engaging with us, and that then encouraged other people to kind of come up to us and just really want to participate and take our surveys as well. Also, while participating in this field work and collecting survey information, you really get to talk to a lot of different people and a lot of different folks. And that was really important because it was these conversations that I had with people that were really off script, like not in the survey, that really allowed me to gain a lot of insight into like the specific issues that our communities are facing when it comes to voting and being outreach to for the voting process and things like that. And this is stuff that, like I said, often isn't reflected in just the numbers. You know, it provides nuances that we can't really explore. And I realized a lot of different things. A lot of different people mentioned issues with convenience. I learned that convenience is everything when it comes to voting. If it's not convenient for people, they're not going to come and vote. And accessibility, whether it be the physical locations to vote or to drop off your ballot, not understanding the process of mail-in ballots, and accessibility through language and translation, as Soleil kind of shed light on. But I think the biggest takeaway I had, and like the biggest one I was surprised by, was really the lack of trust that our communities have in our political systems and institutions. What really stood out to me was conversations I had going into detail about fears of voter fraud. That was something that really shocked me that I was not expecting. And also people seeing their vote as not really mattering. A lot of people spoke about how local elections mattered to them more compared to state or federal elections, and how they don't see their vote really making an impact at those levels. But another thing that I also really took away was the importance of how important in-person fieldwork is for this kind of work, especially on the accountability aspect. A lot of times surveys are conducted online where people just get sent an email or a link to a QR code, and it's kind of up to them to fill out the survey and finish it through. It really made a difference that we were there in person, because we kind of acted as this form of accountability for survey takers, where we were there every step of the way with them. We could answer their questions if they had questions about specific questions on our survey, if they didn't really understand what the question was asking, certain language that that were in the questions. So we really acted just kind of as a buffer for them, and also, like I said, accountability. A lot of people got kind of frustrated with us, especially due to the length of our survey, which I believe was like around 20-something questions, especially our elders. They got really angry with us at one point, and we just kind of had to be there for them and be like, you got it, like you're almost there. I promise you there's only 2 questions. There are probably 10 questions left, but you know, you just gotta keep going, keep them captivated. So I thought that was really important, but also, when it comes to working with our elders too and collecting this data, it was really important to be there for them to help them also navigate technology, submitting the survey, things like that. So a lot of times we would have to be there logging their answers for them. And again, that's just something you don't get with a survey that's not in person, when you don't have somebody there in person to help you. But overall, I think this was just a really great experience for me, and I think for all of us. And being in person was really important because I feel like it really showed people we care, and also it made it a lot more personable, and like I said, allowed for those really in-depth conversations that can just can fill in the gaps where data doesn't. So we can really take what we had in these conversations, and kind of move that pin forward, create different questions from it, and just further expand our research, especially in the future, and especially like being students as well, sort of taking this into our own hands too, bringing this back to our communities. So overall, very grateful for this experience.
Awesome, thank you. So in the span of 3 months, we engaged with thousands of individuals at our field sites. Some took the survey and some did not, but as Sophia mentioned, even among the ones who ultimately maybe didn't cross the finish line, didn't finish it, or ultimately like preferred not to take it, right? We still had the opportunity to talk to them about the importance of voting. So our first task is to analyze the data for the report, and I'll turn to some of the highlights from the findings. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right. So as Natalie mentioned, in our survey, we sought to understand the voter experiences of Asian Americans in Los Angeles County, and we surveyed a total of 1,062 in-person surveys of Asian American adults attending community events across San Gabriel Valley, Koreatown, Culver City, and East Hollywood between January and March of this year. We made our surveys again available in many different languages to account for the variety of language preferences within our communities. And then we're going to highlight 3 findings for you all today, but we also have copies of a report on the side over here, and then we have our QR code that's going to pop up in just a bit. So, all right. First, even with the implementation and high awareness of universal vote by mail, we actually found that a plurality of Asian Americans in our survey preferred in-person modes of voting. Second, when digging into some of the reasons that Asian Americans might not necessarily cast a ballot, we found that bilingual materials are not actually making it easier for Asian immigrant respondents to vote, with a majority saying that both the English ballot and also translated ballot materials are hard to understand. And then third, many Asian Americans in Los Angeles do not recall being contacted about the election, even though encouragement does increase the likelihood of them turning out to vote. So I'm going to continue on and elaborate on each of these 3 major findings in a little bit more detail. So as I mentioned, in-person modes of voting actually remain a preference of many Asian Americans in our survey, even with the implementation of universal vote by mail. Among Asian American voters, about 35% prefer to vote in person, 26% prefer to drop off their ballot at a vote center, and nearly 33% prefer to vote by mail. So when breaking this down across the age of voters, we found substantive differences between older and younger Asian Americans. So older Asian American voters preferred in-person modes of voting, while younger Asian American voters were nearly split between preferences to vote in person and voting by mail. You can see that reflected in our graph there, right? We also identified a potential source of difficulty for Asian American voters regarding language access in voting materials. So about 50% of all Asian voters felt as if the English language ballot was difficult to read and understand, while among those that used the non-English materials, right, 45% of those said that the Asian language ballots were also difficult to read and understand. So understanding ballots in both English and Asian languages were particularly difficult among Asian immigrant voters. 61% of Asian immigrant voters reported difficulty with the English language ballot, while 57% said the same about the Asian language ballots. So this suggests that those who likely need translated materials, right, the most, feel like these translated materials are not actually making it easier to vote in the first place, right? So that's a policy recommendation that we expand upon at the end of our presentation and that we also outlined in our report. So under-recruitment of Asian American voters remains a large problem hindering Asian American turnout. About 65% of Asian American respondents in our survey reported contact from political candidates, 54% that they had been contacted by community organizations, and only 46% of Asian Americans reported contact by the LA County Registrar's Office. So we also find that low propensity Asian American voters, those who are not registered to vote, for example, are the least likely to receive this contact, even though they might benefit most from this contact. So Asian Americans who are not registered to vote but plan to receive much lower rates of contact from community organizations, political candidates, and also from the registrar office relative to Asian Americans who are registered and vote in some or all previous elections. So again, in addition to analyzing the quantitative survey data from our report, our student team also conducted in-depth interviews with their family members about why they did not vote and the challenges that they experienced when trying to vote and how easy they felt it was to vote in Los Angeles. So Sophia, can you share some of your feedback that you learned by talking with your family here?
Hi, I'm Sophia. I was also working alongside Sydney and Jasmine, doing field work. And one of the first steps before we stepped out and did field work was we spoke with our families just to kind of get a sense of what kinds of questions we should be asking voters or people who maybe chose not to vote. So just for some context on my family, I'm of Chinese descent, and my family kind of immigrated to Vietnam. And so starting with my grandparents and my parents' generations, they were born and raised in Vietnam, and then they came to the United States as refugees of the Vietnam War. So the two relatives that I chose to interview were my uncle and my aunt, both on different sides of the family just because they came from very different regions of Vietnam, different economic backgrounds, and I just wanted to get a sense of their kind of experience with voting in Vietnam or just anything to do with politics. And both of what they expressed to me was that they felt very disempowered in Vietnam politically. They felt like if they did vote, it wouldn't go anywhere, it wouldn't matter, because they felt that the politicians would just ultimately do whatever they wanted anyway, and their vote just didn't count. And so for my aunt, she expressed that there were times where people would actually bring the ballot box to her house and literally force her and her family members to vote, even when they didn't want to, so there wasn't really a choice. And my uncle expressed that he would avoid voting as much as possible, but he had known people who got arrested just for expressing the wrong political view in public. So these were very disempowering moments, and they just felt like with the war, with the changes before and after, just powerless to change their political situation. And when they first came to the United States, they felt this huge shift because suddenly they lived in a democracy where votes counted, where they could vote for issues that they believed in, for politicians they believed in. And so it was very disheartening for me to hear that they actually faced quite a few difficulties in voting. And while my uncle is a bit more familiar with English and so was able to use the English ballots, he struggled a little bit, at least, with the technicalities of the ballot, such as instructions or certain candidate statements. He said that sometimes they could be very convoluted, difficult to understand, and he wasn't entirely sure what he was voting for sometimes. And of course, this got better over time, but it was still kind of an obstacle to voting. And my aunt, who was a lot less familiar with English, she tried using the translated versions. And my family speaks both Cantonese and Vietnamese, so she tried using both the Chinese and the Vietnamese translated ballots, but she said that they simply just did not make sense. They were very convoluted. They used terms that just speakers don't normally use. And from her description, it sounded almost like kind of when you just plug in a bunch of words into Google Translate and it just comes back out not really translated correctly in the right context, convoluted, just very stilted language. So as a result, what my aunt chooses to do and how she's been voting for decades is she chooses to have the English ballot, and then she uses her own translation tools to translate it word for word into Cantonese so that she can vote. Because coming from Vietnam, feeling that difference between not living in what she felt to be a fair democratic state to what she is living in now has really empowered her to try and overcome every obstacle to go and vote. But of course, not everyone has the same motivation or the same amount of time and resources that she can devote to translating the ballot, researching all the topics herself, making sure that she knows what she's voting for. And so, as Soleil touched on, it's so important to have these translated versions that are actually accessible to people who might not speak English or just find it difficult to understand the English ballot for any reason. And this was something that was a view that was reflected in some of the people that we spoke to during field work as well, particularly because I was speaking to a lot of native Cantonese speakers. They also found that the translated ballots weren't really helpful. And so just my big takeaway from this incredible fieldwork experience, from interviewing my family on a topic that I hadn't really spoken to them about before, was just that if translations are made more accessible, our community could be more empowered and feel more like they're able to vote without having to devote a huge amount of time and resources just to understand what they're voting about.
Thanks, Sophia, for providing that context. So when bringing together the findings from the survey data as well as our students' interview data, one important lesson that Sophia touched upon that we drew was really regarding how difficult it is to use translated voter material, especially for immigrant voters. So this was not necessarily what we expected, so this is something that was really surprising to us. According to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, counties which have 5% or more of a group that speaks a non-English language must be provided ballot materials in that language. And the assumption is that language access makes for a more easier and equitable access for minority voters. So based on this presumption, translated ballot materials should be making things easier, not harder for immigrant voters. Yet we're actually finding the opposite to be the case here in Los Angeles for Asian American voters because the Asian language translations appear to be lacking. So while we commend the Los Angeles County for providing language access at the ballot box, simply offering ballot materials written in other language is not necessarily sufficient because the point is to alleviate the challenges of understanding what's on the ballot for immigrant voters, right? So therefore, the translation needs to be correct in order to be helpful for voters. So our study showed that voting materials offered in Asian languages didn't necessarily make it easier to vote. And again, our interview data suggested also that the translation of voting materials is poor, and this makes reading these translated ballot materials difficult. So it really makes us wonder, what are the negative implications, right, that result from voter frustrations with reading the ballot materials? If people who use these translated materials find that these translations are poor, does that lead them to distrust the materials or perceive that these materials are not actually legitimate sources of political information? Does this lead them, right, to therefore vote less because they do not trust that the ballot they cast is not actually supporting what they think they're trying to support in the first place? Use of English-only language ballot materials here in Los Angeles is actually really high, right? And perhaps this is because the translated ballot materials are poorly written. So immigrant voters may prefer the English versions, even if English is not their native tongue. So to emphasize here, this is a voting rights issue for Asian Americans. So while we started off just simply by implementing a survey, through this study we ended up identifying several policy needs for the Asian American community, and this will help guide some of our steps forward. Right, so here are 3 policy recommendations based on our findings. So since, again, we found that Asian Americans, particularly immigrant voters, have a difficulty with the ballot, we'd like to see an evaluation of translation accuracy used in bilingual voting materials in the hopes that these resources can confidently be useful tools to ease the voting process for the Asian American community, especially here in Los Angeles. We also like to advocate for increased opportunities for in-person voting among communities with high concentrations of Asian Americans, since we do find that it remains a preferred mode of voting for many alongside vote-by-mail opportunities. And then lastly, we encourage organizations, political organizations, community organizations, and also the registrar office to have greater contact with Asian American communities. And we encourage these organizations to make recruitment efforts to engage with currently non-registered voters whose encouragement could end up mobilizing these Asian American voters come election day. So because our study helped to lead us to identifying these policy needs for our community, our group here at UCLA, LMU, and CAUSE would like to pivot now towards advocating for policy changes regarding language access at the ballot box. And this is a really ideal outcome for academic research. So a couple months ago, since our study identified policy solutions, in late May, our team actually participated in the Asian American Lobby Advocacy Day in Sacramento, where we presented our study and offered policy recommendations to legislative staff and offices. And in the future, we'd hope to plan to advocate for more improved language access at the ballot box. And Jasmine's going to share a little bit about our time in Sacramento.
Sorry, friends, I'm a little on the taller side, so I'm just going to adjust this here. Thank you so much, Professor Chan. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine, and I would love to talk to you a little bit about our Sacramento trip. So, discussing our research findings and our policy asks at the AANHPI Advocacy Day in Sacramento has definitely been one of the most rewarding and unique professional opportunities that I've had the honor of participating in during my time at UCLA so far. And I definitely have the members of our UCLA, CAUSE, and LMU research team to thank for making this happen. Working with this team over the course of 2 academic quarters has definitely been such a joy, and I'm glad to have made many friends along the way also. And I just want to say that this research definitely has like a special place in my heart, at least. Definitely being a lifelong resident of the San Gabriel Valley, or the 626, which is a predominantly Asian area, it was definitely extremely fulfilling and transformative to advocate at the state capitol for my community's right to more effectively and accessibly partake in civic engagement. Our research tools and everything with our team was definitely such like a wonderful thing to participate in. Carrying on with like the personal connection that I have, my family consists of Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees who immigrated to the US to ensure that they could have political power in their new country. And I know this is something that Sophia definitely touched on in her testimony also. And you know, as we can see through mine and Sophia's and many other experiences, this narrative and sentiment is very prevalent across many Asian families that have persevered through a variety of challenges to soon arrive in the US. And as Professor Chan was talking about, our policy recommendations definitely honor all of their aspirations. Similar to myself, many others in our student research team carry personal ties, making our participation in this research all the more significant to us. This trip to Sacramento enabled many of us to directly advocate to the state legislative offices for the very first time, an initially daunting but very exhilarating and inspiring opportunity, as you all can probably imagine. An issue that was once discussed at only family dinner tables and events, as Sophia mentioned, has now become a subject for which we could recommend direct legislative action for. And you know, just to recap, it was remarkably gratifying to turn our hours of team meetings and engaging with conversations with community in our outside fieldwork into tangible policy asks, aiming to cultivate statewide changes with our research. At AANHPI Advocacy Day, our advocacy groups met with various offices of assembly members and state senators, facilitating very meaningful and thoughtful conversations about prevalent issues within our community. We presented our research findings and legislative recommendations alongside asks for co-authoring bills such as SB 1078, AB 2979, and SB 782. And Charlene and I, who unfortunately isn't here yet, but she'll be here later, so hopefully you all get the chance to meet her. Charlene and I, we were placed into the same advocacy group at AANHPI Advocacy Day, and we focused primarily on our first policy ask, which is improving the evaluation of Asian language translations of voting ballots and informational flyers. And our research team found that nearly 60% of our AANHPI immigrant survey participants, just to recap, stressed their difficulties in reading the Asian language ballot. These statistics highlight the dire need for increased linguistic accuracy. Furthermore, linguistic accuracy and accessibility is necessary across all government services, transcending just civic engagement. For example, Charlene and I also connected our policy recommendation to SB 1078, which was also referenced in the previous presentation, I believe. And SB 1078 strives to establish the Office of Language Access, or OLA, ensuring individuals with limited English proficiency have complete access to various government programs, working to mitigate linguistic barriers. And you know, mentioning this bill is just like especially significant during this time because it's still currently progressing through the legislature. And legislative bills and policies like these really spearhead efforts for linguistic equity and accessibility and ensure a future where everyone, regardless of cultural heritage, can receive necessary services. In conclusion, on behalf of the UCLA student research team, I can confidently say that many of us will carry this experience well into the future, utilizing it to continue fueling our passions for our professional endeavors and ANHPI advocacy in various sectors, thank you so much for listening to this little tidbit of my experience. It was really exciting to speak here with all of you today and, just like get a chance to share a little bit about my participation in the program. And at this time, I'll pass it back to Professor Chan.
Yeah, so to close, thank you to all of our student presenters and Soleil. And I'd like to just close our discussion by asking Nancy to provide some insight on how we'd like to move forward with all of this. So Nancy, would you please?
Hi, everyone. Just really, for me, it was really interesting today to actually have an opportunity to talk about data disaggregation and language access. It's something we talk a lot about in our communities, but until I started working in these two partnerships, I hadn't really thought about how it played out on the ground, the day-to-day, and really engaging with people about voter education. I had no idea would result in, I think for me, what was really important information to back the way we are strategically moving forward around voter education. I too found data to be hard to find about our communities, hard to find in a way that was translated thoughtfully, or at least trying, really just trying. We ended up translating into 5 languages, and just that so many people were excited that we wanted to made the translations actually happen pretty quickly. But I actually found the conversations about translation to be very interesting. I've learned a lot about language. I've learned a lot about culture and how culture translates into the way we talk. That said, I also learned that people do like voting in person. I think that the mail-in ballot is so important. It's clear that we like diversity in the way we vote too. And so yes, we need the mail-in ballots, we know that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have vote centers where you can vote in person, get the resources you need, as well as also have an opportunity to drop off in person. For that reason, this election season, CAUSE is going to be focusing on bringing community together at vote centers. We believe that part of our togetherness will encourage civic engagement, because at the core of civic engagement is actually a connection to community and change. We want our voices heard, and we want to be together in a way that we can actually see ourselves reflected in the day-to-day policies that impact us. And so we are going to start with trying to take very serious data. We are so appreciative of everyone that worked on this report with us, but we also know that voting can be fun. And we hope that you really enjoy some of the voting experiences we're going to have for you at the soiree. But really, based on this data, we found one, we are going to focus on language translation in partnership and in dialogue with government agencies like the county registrar. We've really appreciated the LA County Registrar's engagement with us. We know that translation is important, and we just all want to make it better. And so a lot of our focus will be there, as well as really highlighting vote centers and making it destination locations. Here in LA County, you can vote at any vote center, so why not vote near your favorite San Gabriel Valley restaurant? But how that, just gathering for brunch near a vote center during those 10 days could get that many more people to turn out. This can be fun community engagement. That's what we're hoping to do here at CAUSE. And now we have the data to show that these strategies actually are what our community is looking for. Opportunities to understand, engage, and actually share how they feel about what is happening to them in their day-to-day lives. And so just really appreciative of this collaboration. Really love this report, but we also just love how it came about. It literally came from a panel conversation we had at UCLA. We were in the middle of advocating for the registrar's office to make sure we had vote centers in our communities. There were some neighborhoods that didn't have them, and with collaboration with the registrar's office, we were able to get vote centers in Koreatown and Chinatown. But for us on the ground, we were like, that should never have happened. Why did this happen? But in kind of trying to unveil that, we ended up collaborating with both Dr. Chan and Dr. Masuoka to create survey questions that are like, do people even love these places? Do people want to go there? And since they have said they do, we're excited to be able to bring people together. So on that note, thank you so much to everyone who collaborated on this report with us. I also do want to acknowledge that the students were, this is an expansion of Cause on Campus, which is a program where we bring internships to college campuses so that students can add those experiences to their resumes. And so this UCLA collaboration was originally part of that, and actually now this product of this research report will help us move forward. So just continuing to share the things that Cause is doing and what we're hoping for in the future. Thank you all so much for being here at our pre-event report conversation.